Before I start, I can't see very well, so there are people here that I know. Please forgive me because I can see about 6 feet. So forgive me if I don't recognize you guys from here. My name's Gus Kopriva, and what I was going to do is tell you a little about my background, how this all started. And I'm going to talk more about things that are more human interest than technology and printmaking, because I'm not a printmaker. And tell you a few stories about the collection, how it got started. And then we'll answer questions, because I'm much more, I feel much more comfortable answering questions, or at least attempt to answer them. So anyways, I was a product of World War II. My mother lived in Southwest Germany on the French border. And she, after the war, she had a relationship with a French officer from Normandy, and c'est moi, I'm the result. The relationship lasted about maybe 6 months. After he saw me, then he ran off, went back to France.
Oh, wait a minute.
Of course, the relationship between the French and the Germans was not that good at that time. But anyways, the story is a great ending. So I grew up in the rubble, in the bunkers after the war. My mother, the American Army hired her for whatever reason I'm not sure of, but she worked for the Army a long time. And she was in the German Army also. So, she was a very young woman, but she married an American soldier named Kopriva, who was from Prague. And so I've got the first name from my French father and my last name from my stepfather who adopted me. We moved to New York. He was in the military, so we moved all over the United States. So I grew up essentially with a very famous New York, Texas painter over my couch, our couch. His name was Robert Wood, and he was a blue bottom painter. So, and this was a reproduction. So the full extent of our collection at the house, besides many cases of beer and whiskey, was a Robert Wood painting. And I looked at that painting all the time, and that's about it. That's all I knew about art. So I went on. I went to the University of Houston, got a degree in engineering, because I like science and math. And then my third year, I got bored with engineering. And I met my future wife, Sharon Kopriva, who's an artist in Houston, Texas artist. And I started going over there because they had a lot of nude modeling courses. And so I finished my engineering school and then run over fine arts, because that's where the action was. When they're smoking pot. I mean, it's like a different world. And I immediately realized that I was in the wrong profession. But spending time in the Department of Art, I realized that there was no money in it. So I decided then to get my engineering degree and worked with a major American company for many years. I still do. I do consulting on the side. And that's how I make my money to feed the habit. So instead of buying stocks, or buying a lot of drugs, or chasing women, or whatever, I buy art. That's my passion. And it's through my wife. So my wife is studying art history from Peter Gunther, and whose father was a member of the 19 group after World War I, Alfred Gunther. He was a good friend of Otto Dix, anyways, and Gerhard Marx. So everything my wife read about German art, the Expressionists especially, I started reading. And then I really went overboard and I started buying. So I had a global job. So everywhere I went, I bought art wherever I could. One piece at a time. So I've been collecting a long time. Why German art? I'm half German. I love the print medium because frankly, I can afford an Otto Dix lithograph. I cannot afford an Otto Dix painting. So the print medium is great for that. people able to collect original art signed and done by the hand of the artist. So that's why I went into a print medium. The Expressionist art, as you can see, a lot of it is very relevant today. I could pick almost any piece in here. It's socially relevant, politically relevant. A lot of it is anti-war, which the first war produced. So to me, it was fresh art. And I realized, talking with many artists at the universities, that they admired this body of work that was done right after the war. So the collection essentially is from 1871 through 1945. 1871, Bismarck came around. Numerous countries, united numerous countries. Many of them spoke different dialects. And then I ran it through when Hitler, essentially after the war, in 1945. So that's sort of, with some exceptions, that's sort of the range of this particular collection. There's over 300 of them. Most of the major artists are represented. I also went after a lot of the second generation people that were not well known. There's also, you'll notice, French, Russian artists in here. They were part of the Berlin scene in the early 20s, like Chagall, for example. That piece was made in Berlin. So I connected them all together because there was a lot of communication between the Germans, the French, the Russians, the Italians. I was amazed in my studies of how much intercommunication there was between the various countries, politics aside. So another interesting part of all this, each one of these pieces, each one of these artists, as of all artists, presented stories that were so interesting. You couldn't make a lot of this stuff up, what happened to some of these guys. It was just amazing. You can do film. You probably seen the film on Frida Kahlo, injured in a traffic accident and going after Diego Rivera and all that. These other folks are just, all these stories just match. I mean, there's one guy, Otto Schubert, World War I. No one hardly knows him, but he was classified as degenerate by the Nazis. Hitler was a realist painter. He did 400 or 500 works. And he was not able to pursue his art career in Vienna, so he ended up, as you all know, in World War I. He was a soldier in World War I. He was in the trenches. And then afterwards he went into politics, and you know the rest. But his particular, he and his group were supporters of more realist, more nationalistic art, heroic art. And they did not like this type of art. So you take a painter like Max Liebermann, who's an impressionist, or Louis Corneth. These guys in the early 1900s were painting in styles similar to the French Fauves and so on, impressionists. But the Kaiser was also a realist. So every year in Berlin, the Kaiser held a national exhibition. These guys couldn't get in because they weren't painting realistic art. But Hitler carried this forward in the 30s and said, if you guys are not realists, you're essentially producing works that was like you see in mental institutions. So he did this giant exhibition that toured Germany in 1937 called Antarctica Kunst. And he stripped all the museums of the Expressionist work, fired the curators, forbade them to paint. A lot of them left. Came here like Beckmann and Gross and so on, and influenced American abstract painters, artists. A lot of them stayed, Otto Dix, Rolfs, and put up with it, but they were forbidden to paint. So they painted in the cellars what they wanted to paint, and upstairs in the living room they painted landscapes, which were acceptable. Great stories of all of this. It's just so fascinating to me how the politics dictated what people were supposed to do art-wise, and it's almost incomprehensible for me to even understand that. I could see it from a political standpoint. So on the side, the Germans were collecting, huge collectors in the 30s. They either stole it or bought it. Huge collectors of heroic art, Expressionist painting, French paintings and all. Great art, but the Expressionist paintings, they kind of sold off at auctions in Switzerland and so on to make hard currency. But at the same time, some Nazis were collecting this stuff also on the side. They could publicize it, but they would steal it from the museums, sell some of it, burn some of it along with some of the books, and then also collect some of it. So I might point out there's a couple artists in Franz Marc, who I'm sure you've seen his paintings, the blue horses, the red sunsets, fabulous painter. He did beautiful woodcuts of animals and so on. He and August Mack, they were members of the Blue Rider, which were secessionist groups against the Kaiser. They essentially were very nationalistic. All these guys were. So this war that started in 1914, they thought, the last couple of weeks. And by the way, this year is the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I in August 14, I think. And so they all joined, went to the war. Mark and Mac was very tall, got shot in the head about 3-4 weeks in the trenches. He was hit in the head with a shell or something. So all of a sudden, all these great artists, being so nationalistic, they wanted to join, get it over with, fight for Germany. All of a sudden, they're dead. There's a whole group of these that died during the war. And a whole group of these that were affected by the war. Otto Dix was a machine gunner for 2 years. He survived. And if you're ever in Dresden, look at those anti-war paintings. They're horrific. It's some of the greatest anti-war art that you've ever seen in your life. And all was based on their experiences in the war. Beckmann, the same way, Max Beckmann, who taught here in the United States, he was an ambulance driver. He had a mental breakdown in the war. They mustered him out. Stories and stories of these guys. Most of these artists were in the Degenerate art exhibition, so they were considered forbidden artists by the Nazi regime. Some, like Kathy Kollwitz, who I consider one of the greatest printmakers in the world, were sort of untouchable. She was so popular. She was a professor of art at the University in Berlin, but she finally lost her job. But she lost her grandson. I think she lost her nephew in the war, the son, and very, very anti-war. And she died probably a month before the end of World War II. This piece was done, as I told someone earlier, for Russia, relief in Russia. Things were so bad after the revolution in 1920, 1921, 1919, that piece was done to raise money. So there were some artists that were so important that the Nazis did not touch. She's not in the Degenerate exhibition. They didn't like her art, but they were afraid to touch her for popular reasons. I continue to buy, so I'm always on the lookout for great art. And I'm striving now to collect some of the second and third generation people that are not popular. People like Willie Yackel. This is considered second generation from the 20s and the 30s. The people that followed the Brooker and the Blue Rider and the Secessionists and so on. So this work, why I do it? Primarily, it's relevant and it's great art, and it's my passion. I love this stuff. I mean, I could look. This is one of my first prints. It's made on rag paper. During the times after the war, people put rags together and made their own paper. You still see part of it. It's wrinkled up. The enemy of paper, obviously, is the light and the mold and the wetness and so on. But it still survived. And some of these are, well, of them down in this exhibition, but some are over 130 years old. So, great stories for each one. Any questions, guys? I've done enough talking.